Hey, good afternoon. Good to have you folks. I now call to order the Board of Supervisors joint meeting with the BZA and Planning Commission Tuesday, October 18th, 2022 at 2 p.m. The board meeting room, 39 Bank Street, Southeast Chatham, Virginia. Caitlin, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Cheshire. Mr. Dalton.
Here.
Mr. Dudley.
Present.
Mr. Scarce.
Here.
Mr. Warren.
Here.
Mr. Ingram.
Here. Ms. Ragsdale or Ms. Vaughn, I believe you guys will call the roll for your committees.
Yes, sir, I'll be doing that.
Thank you,
Mr.
Ms. Vaughn.
Haymore, Mr. Harker, Mr. Oakes, Ms. Meese, Ms. Henderson, Mr. Horn, Mr. Waters, Mr. Easley, Ms. Deering, Mr. Craddock, Mr. Merricks, Mr. Yeaman, Mr. Brumfield, and Mr. Stone.
All right, thank you. Are there any items to be added to the agenda? What about a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
You had me worried there for a minute. Thank you, sir. What about a second?
Second.
Thank you, sir. Any discussion on the agenda? If you would, cast your vote. Okay, the agenda has passed. As far as presentations, who's up first? I believe Ms. Ragsdale? Or, I forget your name, but you with the Berkeley group. Come on up. Good to have you, ma'am.
Thank you, and thank you for having us. My name is Caroline Vanterve, and I am with the Berkeley group. For those of you who were not with us over the summer at the joint kickoff meeting, the Berkeley group is a local government consulting firm. So we work with jurisdictions all over the Commonwealth on a number of local government functions, including planning and zoning, which is why we have partnered with Pittsylvania County to update the zoning ordinance. And with me today is my colleague, Rebecca Cobb, and she'll be with us throughout this process, working with us as well. So today, I wanted to discuss three primary findings. The first being the findings of the zoning diagnostic report, the second being the findings of the public engagement phase from over the summer, and then the third item being the proposed structure of the new zoning ordinance. So this is our first joint meeting to discuss ordinance content. The next joint work session will be in December, and we will be discussing general provisions, administration, non-conforming uses, definitions, and applications. So we will be holding these work sessions jointly every other month until October of next year. We held our joint kickoff meeting with the Board of Supervisors and several Planning Commission members in attendance in July, and then held a threefold public engagement phase in August. I'll go into more detail about public engagement later and what we heard from the community, but it consisted of an online public survey, which ran for 30 days in August, stakeholder interviews, which were targeted small group discussions with industry experts from the county and the city, and then a public workshop, which was an interactive planning exercise to hear from the community. I'll also mention that we spent this morning with staff taking a very thorough tour of the county, so getting to see on the ground the zoning districts and different sites and developments in all areas of the county, and appreciated the opportunity to get to do that. We will be drafting with the goal of finishing drafting in the fall of next year, so bringing the full zoning ordinance back to the public for review in December, with the goal of having final public hearings and adoption of the full ordinance in spring of 2024. So the investigation and public engagement phases of this process are complete, and today we'll be discussing those findings, and then we'll be moving into content development and actual drafting of the document. So the zoning ordinance diagnostic report was completed to take a close look at the ordinance and evaluate its compliance with the Code of Virginia, as well as to the extent to which the ordinance complies with general planning and land use best practices. And based on the results of the diagnostic, which staff provided you as part of your packet, there are 5 primary recommendations for the update. The first primary goal will be to align zoning regulations to achieve the goals of the comprehensive plan. Appendix B of the diagnostic report has a document that outlines the comprehensive plan and its relationship with the zoning ordinance, as well as recommended regulations that can be implemented into the zoning ordinance in order to carry out the vision of the comprehensive plan. And we do understand that the county will be updating the comp plan concurrently with the zoning ordinance, and so we will be following that process to understand our role in helping facilitate that alignment. The second goal is to organize and streamline the zoning ordinance into a clearly written and user-friendly document. The current ordinance is disorganized due to the number of individual text amendments that have happened kind of piecemeal over the years without a wholesale update, and we do find that that is fairly common in older zoning ordinances, such as the ordinance that the county has. And so the table of contents that we're proposing, and I'll get into a little bit more detail about later, intends to streamline the existing content into a document that's as clear and user-friendly as possible. It's easy for the community to interpret, it's easy for staff to be able to interpret and enforce, and it's easy for you all to use and understand in making your land use recommendations and decisions. And third, of course, it's important that the zoning ordinance is fully compliant with the Code of Virginia, and on the next slide, I will highlight existing compliance with state code in greater detail. Fourth, updating uses, use standards, and definition to include modern uses and eliminate outdated ones. And this diagnostic finding was very strongly echoed in what we heard during public engagement, the community wanting to see some newer uses added in the zoning ordinance to help with streamlining permitting and review processes, as well as to reflect the diversification of the local economy that's been occurring in recent years. And then finally, recommending that an annual review of the zoning ordinance be conducted with the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors. This is just a general best practice, and it's recommended to ensure that the zoning ordinance is keeping up with the development trends and land uses in the county. The three graphs you see here depict the percentage of zoning ordinance regulations that comply with the Code of Virginia. So in our review, we went through every section of the State Code Title 15, Chapter 22, which is planning, subdivision of land, and zoning. It's the legislation that enables the county's ability to enact a zoning ordinance as well as a subdivision ordinance. And we determined whether or not the county zoning ordinance fully complied, partially complied, or did not comply with the Code of Virginia. So on chart 1, you can see that 76% of the sections in Chapter 22 applied to Pittsylvania County and 24% did not apply to the county. So there are sections within the Code of Virginia that may not apply to Pittsylvania County for different reasons, most commonly because they apply to a certain geographic area within the Commonwealth, so just the Chesapeake Bay or just Northern Virginia, or they only apply to jurisdictions with a certain population or population density. And I'll note that we did consider any provisions of state code that are considered to be optional to still apply to Pittsylvania County, unless state code explicitly said otherwise. So out of the 55% of the state code sections that are required and do apply to Pennsylvania County, 27% have compliance that is fully achieved, 15% are not in compliance, and 13% are partially compliant. So overall, this is not bad. It can sound scary to say that something is not in compliance, but there are many easy ways that the county can achieve full compliance with its zoning ordinance in its next update. One of the most common ways is to add specific references to the Code of Virginia, introducing new definitions. Code language can also be included verbatim from the Code of Virginia, and those are all ways to achieve compliance in the zoning ordinance. And then finally, 21% of provisions were optional to include in the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance currently does not include most of the optional Code of Virginia provisions, and this is okay because not all optional provisions will be appropriate within the context of the county, and we'll be working with staff and of course with you all to further evaluate this as we are drafting. So as you can see on your screen, this is a very high-level overview of the recommendations from the diagnostic and how inclusion and interpretation of these recommendations would kind of play out in the real world. So the first recommendation being to streamline and organize content and structure, resulting in a user-friendly document and strengthening compatibility. And towards the end of our time together, I will be discussing the proposed ordinance structure, which will closely follow the existing one, but kind of streamline and organize it a little bit more. The second recommendation is to introduce civil penalties as a first line of defense for zoning violations. So rather than moving straight to misdemeanors, the Code of Virginia permits a $200 fine for an initial summons with a maximum of $5,000 for civil summons and not more than $500 for each additional summons. This is just a best practice permitted by the code that kind of helps cut down on some of the time that's spent on enforcing violations. And I'll also note that for repeat offenders, or once that $5,000 maximum is reached, the county can then move to pursuing misdemeanors in those situations. The third recommendation, of course, being to add and define new uses, as well as to remove outdated uses, to streamline application processes and reflect the economic climate of the county. Some examples that we heard from the community of uses that they would like to see added to the zoning ordinance are food trucks, breweries, and mini storage facilities, among others. The fourth recommendation being to review, refine, and consolidate uses, to strengthen use compatibility, to reduce the number of future ordinance text amendments, as well as, again, to streamline application and permitting processes. So for example, in the business district, the county currently includes a hardware store, a toy store, and novelty shops, all as separate listed permitted uses. Since those uses are all similar in nature and would likely have very similar, if not the same standards applied to those, they can all be combined into a specialty store and have the same use standards and permitting procedures. And then recommending, of course, that all definitions as required by state code are incorporated. Examples of definitions that are required by state code that should be added to the ordinance are the definitions of family, cemetery, and a family day home. A few more recommendations that were the high points of the diagnostic review include to develop clear and detailed telecommunication standards. As you all are aware, telecommunications uses have really taken off in recent years, and the Code of Virginia does require that they are addressed in the zoning ordinance. So these updates would be to ensure that the document complies with state code, and again, to streamline application and permitting procedures. So ensuring that definitions, use standards, application procedures for an applicant, and then review procedures for staff, the Planning Commission, and BZA, and the board are included. Updating standards for solar energy facilities to ensure compatibility between differing uses. So including some additional information about siting agreement regulations and negotiations, introducing more stringent design standards for facilities as appropriate, and then clarifying the roles and powers of Pittsylvania County in application review, which the state code outlines that in further detail. Examples of design standards could be a more robust landscape buffer, maybe directing siting to areas near existing transmission lines or substations, requiring that a certain percentage of the project be in open space, and so on. And then finally, introducing community design standards related to signs, landscaping, and lighting, again, to ensure compatibility between differing uses. Some of this does relate to state code compliance as well as compliance with federal case law. There was a Supreme Court case a while back that determined that local zoning regulations had to address signs in a content-neutral manner, so they could not impose different regulations upon signs based on what is written on the sign. It has to be completely content-neutral. So ensuring that the county's sign regulations are content-neutral in nature. Another example of a community design standard could relate to landscaping, so putting in some landscape requirements between industrial and non-industrial uses, or commercial and non-industrial uses, and then considering commercial and industrial lighting standards, making sure that commercial and industrial lighting is not spilling over onto a residential or agricultural property. Before I move on into discussing community engagement and some of what the community had to say about the zoning ordinance, are there any questions about the diagnostic findings? right. So our community engagement approach was threefold, and it was intended to start broadly and get some broad input from as many members of the community as possible. That was done through a public survey. It was made available both online and in a paper format at county offices for community members who didn't have internet at their houses or would just prefer to take a paper survey. We received 208 responses to that survey, and we did receive some very thorough and thoughtful feedback from the individuals who took the survey, and that was very helpful in getting some of that broad input from the community. And then moving into a little bit more narrow focus with a public workshop, which was an exercise with a small group that focused on specific zoning concerns through an open discussion, and that was also very useful in helping us understand a little bit more of the context of the zoning ordinance and how it is being interpreted by the community. And then finally, stakeholder sessions, which provided insight from community experts. We partnered with staff, and 40 individuals were invited to these meetings. We had 9 who were in attendance. So our due diligence was done, and those who were in attendance did also provide some great feedback. And of course, all feedback is welcomed from anyone who is able to participate at any of those events and opportunities. So the top 3 zoning and land use priorities that were found in the public survey, the first being to preserve agricultural and rural character in the county. The second priority was to protect existing residential uses from other uses. And the third top priority was conserving sensitive environmental areas. Other top priorities not included on this list include improving community appearance, as well as protecting historic areas. The most encouraged non-residential use types are agritourism, outdoor recreation, and home occupations without on-site employees. For example, this would be someone running maybe an internet small business out of their house, or maybe a barbershop where they are the only employee. Other non-residential uses that were favorable include wineries, breweries, and distilleries, and small-scale commercial development such as a bank or fitness studio, although I will note that most all non-residential uses were seen favorably to some degree or another. The most encouraged residential use types were single-family homes, tiny homes, and attached accessory dwelling units. You can see in the full public survey results that were provided to you that all residential uses are seen as generally favorable. Other top most encouraged residential uses are manufactured housing and detached accessory dwelling units. Other notable findings from the survey, there was strong support for implementing use standards for both residential and non-residential uses, as well as strong support for design standards to improve community character, especially standards relating to landscaping and reducing sign clutter. That was a finding from the diagnostic report, and that was also something that was strongly supported by participants at both the public workshop and the stakeholder meetings as well. In general, the top priority for participants at the public workshops was to preserve and protect the county's rural character and agricultural economy. Participants wanted appropriate regulations for commercial and industrial uses, but they also wanted to ensure that there was a balance between regulating appropriately and not deterring businesses from expanding or relocating to the county. So some examples of standards that could be applied that would not be too burdensome include landscaping, providing some greater setbacks between residential and non-residential uses. Introducing additional regulations for solar energy facilities, especially those pertaining to environmental protection and decommissioning of panels. So making sure that solar energy facilities are compatible with the surrounding environment. Ensuring consistency between the zoning and subdivision ordinances. I will clarify that this update is just the zoning ordinance and not the subdivision ordinance, but there's still the opportunity to create harmony, and we'll be taking a look at that throughout the drafting process. Protecting small businesses, especially those in residential and agricultural areas, and including new uses as appropriate in the zoning ordinance, including tiny homes, agritourism, and affordable housing. And of course, the survey results showed strong support for these new uses, as well as wineries and breweries and short-term rentals such as Airbnb. And then participants also noted that the size and number of billboards along routes 29 and 58 is concerning. The public workshop, participants discussed housing, identifying that housing of all types is needed and that new development should integrate adequate green space for residents. Participants at the workshop also indicated that they wanted to see compatible commercial and civic uses integrated with future residential developments such as libraries and community centers. New uses such as agritourism, food trucks, short-term rentals, breweries, and tasting rooms are favorable. So again, modernizing some of the uses included in the zoning ordinance to reflect recent economic trends in the county. They also indicated that event venues are favorable, but need some additional use standards to ensure compatibility with residential uses, indicating that home-based businesses are very favorable and should continue to be protected and encouraged, indicating that the county needed more needs more industrial uses. However, they did note that they considered vacant industrial lots, rundown buildings, and overgrowth to be a problem. Introducing some landscaping design standards, some buffering standards would help to remedy this issue identified by the community. Solar energy facilities, considering those to be industrial, not agricultural in nature. And then finally stating that mini storage and self-storage facilities are needed in the county and would be favorable uses, but they would need some appropriate buffering and parking requirements to be compatible with the surrounding area and context of the county. Community stakeholder engagement was focused on 4 groups. Different industries were grouped to be similar in nature in order to have some targeted conversation and to get some more specific feedback from individuals who are likely using the zoning ordinance on a daily basis. The first group consisted of business owners, economic development representatives, and representatives from the city of Danville and the towns. The second group, we had invited bankers, attorneys, and real estate agents. The third group included the agricultural community and other special interest groups, such as those representing historic societies or groups in the county. And then the fourth group consisted of surveyors, contractors, engineers, and developers. Across the board, there was strong consensus on several topics. The first being that the zoning ordinance can be complex, confusing to understand and apply, as well as contradictory. All 4 groups discussed housing, and all voiced that housing selection and variety are lacking in the county. While single-family residential dwellings are the most common in the county, again, all types of housing are needed. Newer uses such as food trucks, breweries, and wineries are favorable and appropriate, again, reflecting the results of the survey and the public workshops. Large special uses such as festivals and entertainment venues need some stricter regulations to be compatible with the surrounding environment. Increasing setbacks within the agricultural district, again, to increase compatibility between agricultural uses and residential uses. And then improving and implementing community design standards where needed, especially for larger commercial and industrial uses. So all of these ideas and input that we received during the community engagement phase is interwoven together. A lot of times there was some very strong consensus on improvements that could be made to the zoning ordinance, most notably incorporating new uses, organizing the document, addressing housing, green space, the environment. These thoughts and this feedback provides not only a more holistic context for understanding the opportunities and challenges related to the zoning ordinance, but also provides us with a strong foundation for introducing informed updates throughout the drafting phase. And then finally, before I review the proposed ordinance structure, are there any questions regarding the community engagement findings? All right. The proposed ordinance structure, it includes everything that is in the current ordinance. However, as you can see, it has been condensed and streamlined. So the first 3 articles relate to interpretation, administration, and enforcement. This is also where the bulk of the Code of Virginia compliance will be, where you'll see the state code references or even verbatim language the most. Article 4 and 5 establish the county zoning districts, and Articles 6 through 10 outline permitted uses, use standards, and definitions. So the zoning districts in Article 4 outline dimensional standards, which include setbacks, minimum lot size, road frontage, lot coverage, and they have been consolidated from what is currently existing in the ordinance to keep similar districts together for consistency and readability. So for example, as you can see, Article 4, Division 5 establishes the dimensional standards for residential districts. So this will include all dimensional standards for all of the county's existing residential districts. So residential estates, residential suburban subdivision, residential combined, multifamily, RPD, and manufactured housing will all be included in this division. And then Article 5 will include the overlay zoning districts, and again, the county's current overlays are lake surface, floodplain, and airport. So we're keeping those overlay districts the same, but we'll be reviewing those regulations to ensure they are appropriate within the context of the county, given other updates that we will be making. So Article 6 will be a use matrix like the one shown here. So this will be a new addition to the ordinance. The use matrix is great for providing the community with to interpret and understand because it is in a table format. It includes all of the uses in the county zoning ordinance, and it shows whether or not they are permitted in each zoning district, and if they are permitted, whether it is a by right use or a special use permit. So this allows users to quickly determine which uses are permitted in each district, which is helpful in making applications and for staff in determining what uses are allowed where and answering questions from the community. Finally, we'll be introducing an article related specifically to community design standards, so addressing things such as lighting, landscaping and screening, parking, signs, open space requirements. And this is based on the need that was reflected both by the community and through the diagnostic report for greater compatibility between the county's residential and non-residential uses. The community design standards are going to be light, and this is to avoid over-regulation, so ensuring that balance between compatibility and then again not deterring new uses from coming into the county. So these standards will also be applied in areas of the county that are more commercial or industrial in nature, where there might be a greater need for buffering or for a higher fence or for some regulations on signs, rather than being applied in the more rural and agricultural areas. This is to preserve the character of the county's agricultural areas, and then of course to ensure compatibility between existing uses and new ones. Are there any questions about the proposed ordinance structure?
Caroline, right?
Yes, sir.
What was the issue about billboards?
Billboards, the individuals who came to the community workshop had just said that they thought the billboards along 29 and 58 were too large,
Okay.
and that they were too frequent.
With other, go ahead, sir.
Rebecca is probably a better person to answer that question than I am. He was asking how many counties we have worked with over the last 5 years. Would that be just for a zoning ordinance, or?
Hi, Rebecca Cobb with the Berkeley Group. I've been with the Berkeley Group for 3 years, so I can give you a number on that. I've worked in 3 counties and also a few towns and cities as well, as far as zoning ordinances go. But Berkeley Group has been around for 12 years, and they've done additional county zoning ordinances other than that.
We also help counties, not just with wholesale zoning ordinance updates like we're working on with you all, but also kind of piecemeal zoning ordinances as well. So individual articles or divisions that need to be amended.
You know,
So Rebecca could probably provide some more context over the last 3 years, but in the past year, we feel that 200 responses to the survey is strong. It's certainly higher than some other localities that we've worked with in recent years. We don't necessarily look so much at the quantity of results as the quality of feedback in the survey that we're receiving. So in the survey, there was an open-ended question as well as kind of open-ended questions throughout the way where respondents could kind of justify their answer. So for example, if they said yes to a question, they could explain why, or if they said no to a question, they could explain why. So we felt that 200 responses was very strong, and we did feel like the input that respondents provided in that survey was very useful in understanding the context of the county and the ordinance. Rebecca, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. One thing that I've seen, if a community feels like, oh, we didn't get a good survey response, or we didn't have good stakeholder response, and they want to go back out and do additional feedback and do additional survey or things like that, it really doesn't change the answers that we get. As she mentioned, when we get valuable information and people really do take the time to fill it out, we find that those answers are going to be consistent across, even if more answers come in. But yes, we were actually pleased. Localities everywhere have a difficult time in the engagement part, getting people to care about zoning. You know, most people don't even know what it is until something is moving next door that they don't like. So, you know, that's the difficult piece everywhere, and we were happy with what we received here.
Are there any other questions or any comments or input on the proposed ordinance structure? So her question was which group of the stakeholders had the greatest representation. So I'll note that we, or staff, I should say, invited the same number of participants for each focus group, but the fourth focus group, which consisted of the developers and surveyors, had the largest turnout. Are there any other questions?
I have a question. What kind of feedback have you gotten out of the 200 maybe, out of the solar facilities that we have in our county? Have you got anything?
Is your question asking to what extent feedback was provided on the solar facilities, or what type of feedback?
Did you get any feedback according to how the solar is set in our community right now?
Yes, sir. So the biggest concern that we heard from residents regarding solar facilities was related to setbacks and landscape buffers. So wanting to see solar facilities further away from the road, wanting to see some more landscaping between solar facilities and non-solar facilities, so all other uses. There were also some concerns about environmental protection, so some concerns over decommissioning of panels. So what's happening to the solar panels at the end of their life cycle? How is that being addressed in the zoning ordinance? And those were really the top 3 concerns related to solar that we heard.
Okay, thank you.
Our contact information is on the screen. If you have any questions that you think of after the fact or any other comments that you think of after today that you would like to provide us with, you can share it with us or you can pass it along to staff and she will share it with us as well. But thank you again for your time today. We're looking forward to being back with you all in December to share the first initial draft content of the ordinance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What about your colleague? Do you have anything you want to add?
I just want to thank you all for being here and asking thoughtful questions, and we will need more of that as we progress forward, because we will, start diving into what your ordinance is going to say. And so it's going to be really important for you to do your homework and come ready to discuss with us and let us know how we can change things and tailor it more to what you're looking for.
Hey, do
Thank
you recall how many surveys went out?
So the survey was online. The paper versions were available. I don't know that anyone turned any paper versions in, but the number online that we received was... Staff didn't receive any paper copies, but the online survey was widely distributed. There were flyers that had the QR code and the link on them. It was advertised at the workshops and the stakeholder meetings, and the county also pushed out the survey regularly on its social media pages through regular posts.
Yeah, I was thinking when you sent them out, the computer could keep up with how many were delivered or received, and 208 responded to that. Anywhere along the line, did you pick up on the fact that we have some severe internet problems? Do you think that would be a contributing factor to the low number of responses? Even though you said it was a good number?
In some cases, that does contribute. We feel like it's a good number, and that's also why we had provided the paper copies, is for folks that don't have internet at their houses.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just to add to that, we did in all of our advertisements state that you could pick up paper copies in our office, and we did not have anyone come into the office and ask for a paper copy, and we didn't have anyone bring them back. So we did make that available to help address the internet issue because we knew that that would be a factor.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. I believe the county had posted it several times on the Facebook page. All right. Thank you again. We'll see you in December.
All right, thank you. Ms. Ragsdale, did you have anything else?
I did not.
Okay. Any comments, questions from the board or the commission members? If not, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Mr. Dalton made that motion. What about a second?
Second.
All right. Okay. Thank you guys for coming.